I will rather be director of my own life than the someone else. This freedom is very important for me. I think innovation is everything that is new and brings value. It has to be value, it has to be used, because otherwise it's not innovation, it's not making use, and maybe it's just creative solutions. So all those are not innovation because they're not used. Only those that make money, they're innovation. Those are the patents and creative solutions. Social media like to oversimplify things so much. I think it's very dangerous to oversimplify things, and social media has been amplifying this trend. He's also doing that. We need to be able to use, and we have to use it, but if you don't know the area, is very dangerous when you use it. So I think the most important is to understand that things are not as straightforward as it's convenient for us to believe.
There's a lot of talk these days around putting like padding around thoughts and feelings and making things safe and demonstrating empathy and care. And I think that sounds nice, but all of my heroes have had horrible lives. And so I'm wondering, like, in your lived experience, what do you think is the meaning behind suffering?
What is the meaning behind suffering? I don't think that we suffer for the sake of suffering. We think that something better is in the other end. And since you are mentioning this hard work or hard life, and when I was doing the research for the book, I have the chapter on creativity, and I read some articles about if people who have been suffering or have difficulties in life are more creative, because we love to think about this, right? And it's not scientifically proven, actually. but I think actually what the science says that stability and safety helps you to flourish. But when I look at on myself, I did take the risks, but I was in a way in control of the risks. And I believe also it was your grandmother, because, if she was working, as long as she was working, she was providing and creating. It wasn't unsafe in a way. It was actually a very safe choice. If you get a job, you will manage. So I think that but it was hard. But what's the price at the end? And then I was willing to sacrifice, because I always think like it's better to suffer now in order for the later benefit. But like they say now, generations, they don't do that. They like to enjoy more and don't care about the future, because the future is very unsafe. But my philosophy was, in order to make the future safe, you have to work hard today. And that's been the whole story of my life, because I remember when I was reading Hemingway, the Old Man and the Sea, I was 14, and that had such an impact. And I think that was the same topic was for my life. And I gave this book to my son, who is now 14, 15. And I don't know if he got the message the same way I did. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, absolutely. And perhaps I should have used the word adversity, but what I took away from your answer is that it's important to have kind of a goal or a vision on the other side of discomfort, having some agency or intention on what you're doing and why. And it does track with my grandma.
Yeah.
It reminds me of a previous podcast guest who seemed very kind of risk averse in his profession and some decisions he made. And but he surprised me with an answer saying that he chose entrepreneurship because he thought it was more secure, rather than working for someone else who could lay you off without clear like you can't predict what's going to happen. He wanted to have control of his own destiny. So in that sense, I think my grandma's kind of path was perhaps similar.
Same with me. I have exactly the same thing. I will rather be director of my own life than the someone else. And this freedom is very important for me. But also when you look, I love that you said this risk awareness. Your grandma, she ended in Canada. That's very safe country, right? And US is very safe country, and it's very entrepreneurial. And I also ended up in Norway. And I was also thinking about, should I go to US or Norway? And Norway is much safer choice. But I have very, like, we all have different different inclinations towards risks. And I have someone very close in my family, and that person says to me that he would never be able to have own company. But that person sits in the car and drives throughout the whole Europe on a highway without any problems. And I'm scared of that. Just because I didn't do it, just because I didn't learn to it. But if you are learned it, and I was born in an entrepreneurial family, so for me that was normal and acceptable. So you build a tolerance towards maybe unsafety or insecurity in one way, but maybe not in someone else's. And it's so interesting for me to compare me and that person, how different but the same we are actually. Like I'm risk averse for that, and he is risk averse for this. So, but I think it's lots of about, like, life and what you learned. We are learning, like we have learned behavior and what we have learned to tolerate in that.
It's a good thing that I guess that we have different areas that we are more or less comfortable to go down, or more or less willing to push through that adversity.
Yeah.
So when it comes to coming to innovation, well, in fact, actually, let me ask you, because what I was going to say is that potentially innovation is coming up with ideas to get around adversity, right? To make things easier, to make them better. But how would you define innovation? How do you see it?
I think innovation is everything that is new and brings value. It has to be value. It has to be used. Because otherwise it's not innovation. It's not making use, and maybe just creative solutions. So that's what I make the difference between those two as well. And I always love to use this mousetrap example from US as the most patented item in US patent history, mousetrap.
Really?
You know the story?
No.
No,
I know
okay.
the game. I love the game.
No, not the game mousetrap, the mousetrap.
The actual
Like
mousetrap.
an actual physical mousetrap.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the most patented item in US patent history.
Wow, I didn't know that.
It's more than 4,500 patents on this topic. Can you believe?
Wow.
Only few make money. So all those are not innovation because they're not used. Only those that make money, they are innovation. Those are the patents and creative solutions.
So that brings up a lot of like rhymes in my mind with signal versus substance, or like kind of what's external versus what is like the kind of quality of someone's character or someone's achievement. And there's a lot, particularly in social media, there's a convenience with being able to network across borders, but there's also more of an indexing on appearance because you don't know me. We didn't grow up together. Maybe I'm not from Croatia. Maybe I made up that whole story, or my grandma for that matter. And with like universities, for example, there's a business model there that has a lot of beauty to it. The history of institutions and collaboration and thought leadership and research and development. But there's also a lot of opportunity for like symbolism without follow through. And when people get a degree, or they say I've reached this level of education, I think that there's an assumption that that means something in and of itself. And perhaps it does. Maybe I'm being a little bit dismissive. But I think in my own life and some people I've spoken with and seen, there's a disillusionment that happens that was the tip of the iceberg. The real value is in what you do with it. I think when you mention innovation and these patents, that's a huge discrepancy. 4,500 patents, only a handful are actually meaningful in a financial sense. And so I was thinking, with all the disruption we have in the job market and business and livelihood for the foreseeable future, people are looking for making good bets. They want to get in on good stocks. They want to pursue good goals and be able to have a life of security and perhaps comfort. That to me is kind of what I heard when you mentioned this discrepancy with patents. is there a corollary there in your understanding? And if so, what is the, let's say, magic or secret sauce between having a good idea or pursuing something that looks good and then also making it meaningful?
Good question. I don't know if I will be able to grasp. But okay, let's digest. Let's kind of try to divide the question. So so you are asking whether there is a substance or there is just an idea, right? Like, and then you use the metaphor of the universities. And universities, they have, throughout the years, they have built credibility and the stamp. And this has been shown, and through the centuries, through the centuries, they have built the quality. So when people get out, you know which quality you get. And that can be an obstacle that the new actors come to the market. Because I see it here in Norway, for example. They love the big four. They love the new name, the known names, established names in consultancy. And if you're small, it's always question mark there. But like in some other places, it's the other way around, apparently. Some other places, like the small agents, smaller private companies, smaller consultancies, because they know that they're much more hungry because they have to prove themselves. Why they're hungry, they have to prove. They have to earn this credibility that the big ones already have. And when we talk about then the disruption of the market, and what I'm hearing, like yesterday, I was on this event and there was a fantastic small 57 people accounting company. And then they want to have a board, external board, professional board, and they are looking for candidates. And then someone asked, do you want to sell out your company? And I was thinking, it cannot be that we are all selling to the big ones. That cannot be like the purpose of economy, because then we will end up, we have with the big tech right now, you know, oligarchy. So, and it goes this way because it's cheaper. So as an economist, I'm observing this trend, and I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but this buying and the big buying smaller ones, it kills the competition, and then when you don't have competition, you don't have the good offer on the market either.
I'm at a crossroads myself with that framing. So in my own kind of insecurity and imposter syndrome, I want the validation of McKinsey or LinkedIn or Harvard or some big institution to say, I value what David has done. And then I can go tell people, someone that you've heard of thinks I'm worth something.
Yeah.
And so I think for many of us, to the sense that I'm projecting my own kind of understanding onto the world, are seeking similar validation, or at least it's attractive to say, hey, Amazon bought my company, or, you know, something like that.
Or my book was #1 best-selling on Amazon as well, you know?
Yeah, there's a lot of number ones out there. That's interesting how that works. Always inventing new categories. So, but then you're right, obviously. We can't all, like, we'll just have one company at the end of the day. Or maybe that is the direction we're going. And now I find the like value is the North Star, and the only thing that means something at the end of the day. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on the kind of incentives. What is it that we seek in your understanding of the professional market these days? And where is there perhaps misalignment? Like, should we be doing something, and perhaps you can frame it in like innovation and that discrepancy between a good idea and actually like meaning something for the community or the environment?
Well, the meaning is very different to different people. You know, we all have different values and norms, and something that I value might be completely different for you. So those, and I think while maybe our generations were much more about getting the big names on the CV, for example, the new generations are not so much into it, maybe, because they're not so much into prestige. They want to have their life good now, good quality, something is good enough. So I think it's also personal choice what you want to do and how you want to do it. When it comes to the good idea, we can have many good ideas, but it's not the problems to have a good idea, it's the problem to bring them to the market. And that's where it fails. And like also, if you look with electric cars, this idea existed since the beginning of the 20th century.
It's a really interesting point you bring up with the electric car being existing for a while.
But it was until, it for idea, which I always say, the market also has to be ready to take it, to absorb it, to feel useful, right? So if the market is not ready, your idea can be fantastic, but it doesn't help to anyone. So the things that something is successful, it's much more complex that we like to believe. And you talked about social media, and social media like to oversimplify things so much. Like, oh, I just did it, and I succeed, and now I have 200,000 followers, and now I'm making big money, and I have big sponsors. And the same happens with innovation. Only use this framework, and you will be innovative. Yeah, but why aren't we then? We all have been using the design thinking. We have all been introduced to the business model canvas, but still we are the same level. Like, we are not flourishing in the way we thought we are. So I think it's very dangerous to oversimplify things, and social media has been amplifying this trend. And now we have AI that, and as I teach at the Bay Norwegian Business School as well, AI is also doing that. We need to be able to use, and AI, we have to use it, but if you don't know the area, AI is very dangerous when you use it. So so I think the most important is to understand that things are not as straightforward as it's convenient for us to believe.
I think that's such an important point, especially I think as time goes on with so much technological innovation and with AI, there are so many moving variables that affect the success of an idea through to a unicorn and everything in between, that it is easy to simplify and say, get up before 5 a.m. and you'll be very successful, right? But you can get up before 5 a.m. and do very different things than somebody else that gets up at, 1 p.m. So it's breaking it down, I think, to the multiple areas. But at the same time, if it's too complicated and too many different things I've got to think about, I won't do anything either. So what, in your experience, would you say are a handful of those key variables that take somebody from good idea to it actually working?
Of course, you need to know the market and what the market thinks about the idea. We have one course where I teach, and it's about bringing an idea to the market. And I always told them, this is the idea, it's a great idea. But you have to also talk to the customers and to see what's the feedback. And then you also have to calculate, do you have enough customers interested in the market so that you can survive? Because if you don't have enough, then, or if you don't have enough, how you can pivot this idea so you have enough. And we don't have to go very far away. Like, we have the small cafe where the school is. And for a couple of years, there was bankrupting all those cafes year after year. And every one of them was nice. Every one of them brings value, but they just didn't, for some reason, the business model didn't work. So you have to find a business model that will work for your idea. So, and then of course, it's the question whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're in a big company, all these changes. If you're a small entrepreneur, do you have experience in this field? So then you will have to build up your credibility, right? If you don't know anything, if you come up with some technological thing and you don't, before you were a painter, let's say. So you have to kind of convince the market or the people around you, the stakeholders. Yes, I know these things. And as I'm an entrepreneur, and it's difficult. And I also say that in a way it has to be difficult so that you prove that you are resilient in a way as well. This is how I interpret the things. So
I think there's like almost like a chemical reaction that happens in the difficulty. It almost like splits the atoms in your mind, and it forces your latent potential into kinetic potential that you wouldn't have otherwise. Like ideas come to you that you wouldn't have synthesized. Perhaps like a book that you read when you were 14 or 15, all of a sudden a lesson, well, like your son, maybe the lesson will come to him 20 years from now. He'll be like, ah, yes, I remember now. At the time, I didn't, like, it didn't mean anything. So I think that's part of it is it's this forcing function.
Yeah, it might be a chemical reaction, but definitely, when, yeah, and motivation, I guess, to get out of this, because many people have it difficult, but they also don't have enough energy. Like, how do you explain this? That they don't kind of move from one state to another. But interesting thing is about creativity and ideas, or functional fixedness. You know, as we grow up, we learn what the things are for, and we stuck to this function for that. But the research showed if we think that it's a matter of survival, we are more creative to come up with the different uses of the object. So it has to be, as you said, David, it has to be a matter of survival, actually.
Yeah, which makes sense. Sorry, I was going to say, which makes sense in that if we were not as motivated to survive as we were to do everything else in life, we probably wouldn't have survived, right? So that it makes sense to lean into that physiological element of ourselves that has been true for millions of years and will continue to be as long as humans are around. Tap into that and use it as a way to be innovative, or use it as a way to be creative without putting yourself in too much danger. There's a balance to be
Yes. But if I may actually challenge this little discussion about something, you know, if it's adversity that motivates us to be successful, and they always like to say, oh, Croatia has so many good players, sports players. But now we have Winter Olympics, and Norway has a third Olympics in the row, the most medals Norway has in the Winter Olympics. And Norway doesn't have, those people don't have problems with survival, or like, it's a good country, everyone has it.
They just have a lot of snow. That's what it is. That's what helped them.
I don't know if the snow is that one, but yeah, but it's interesting things. And then, you know, also on the other hand, Norway is it's very safe and secure. They're not so good on innovation and entrepreneurship. On the other hand, the US is better, Sweden is better, Denmark is better. So there are lots of context that also plays a role, I would say.
There's an interesting like quantum superposition that I find two things being true at once. I've mentioned this to Becky in the past, perhaps previous podcast guests, but how our identity as a human being is both an individual and a group organism. So the lessons that you learn and the books that you recommend sometimes skip a generation. Sometimes it's not like we, at least, you know, to the extent that I'll speak from personal experience. I like if I want to recommend something to Becky, it's coming from the frame, this was helpful for me, plug it into your life, and I want to see it be helpful for you in the same exact way it was helpful for me. And very rarely does that happen because we're on like different paths, different contexts. But there's some value in it. It survived. It passed through me to Becky, let's say in this example. And then in some weird way, it might show up in like some other point of value later on that looks different than what I kind of categorized it as. And I think that's also part of it, is just this like being open to being a conduit for consciousness. It's not like we have to patent every single word and thought that I like came up with, because I didn't come up with it. I was like influenced by things that I'm aware of and influenced by things that I'm not aware of, and helpful in ways that I'm not aware of, and you know, maybe hurtful in ways that I'm not aware of. And I guess to my earlier point, that's actually helpful because I'm creating chemical reactions in people to innovate.
I loved what you said, and I wrote down the things that I want to comment, because you were like, I like, first, what I like is when you said we are all individuals and we also part of a groups, And I love that, because that's why I wrote the book. And I have the individuals make groups and groups make organizations. And that's all, like that, exactly that what I was thinking was missing in innovation, because they were coming up with frameworks, but they were missing that all us individuals, we have our own barriers and we are part of the group and the bigger systems. And if you want to have successful innovation that is sustaining for a long time, you cannot work outside those levels. You cannot forget about that and just put like one certain framework and this is it. So I really love, David, and what you said. And then you also said that we are influenced at those levels, and everyone is interconnected, right? The leaders are influencing the group is influencing the leader. So we have to be aware of that and know how to overcome barriers that are coming. And for the leader to lead successful change, successful implementation of innovation, they need to be aware of those things, know how to recognize, reflect, and act on them.
So can you give us some insight for people that might be listening thinking, great, I know I should be aware of it, but how do I actually make use of that knowledge? What does a leader need to do, or what does a member of the group need to do to influence leadership? Is it a communication thing? Is it some sort of system?
That's a very broad question, but let me try to be okay. So we as individuals, we have our own fears, or like now the company has announced we are all going to innovate, we are all going to be creative, and then at least half of the people, if not more, are like, oh no, that's not my thing. I'm not creative. I'm only here to do accounting. I'm only here to calculate the speed or something. But it is your thing as well. Because we all, and what I love the most, what I learned while I was researching for the book, was learning about creativity. And as I grown up in a creative family, my mom, she can draw. My sister is an architect and can draw, and I'm not that one. So I thought it's not my thing. But actually, what creativity has several dimensions. One is artistic. When we have everyday, and we all are doing everyday creativity, like when we are solving everyday problems, making a meal with the little things that we have in the fridge. And then you have this scientific creativity that is based on a deep knowledge in a certain area. So if you have been working for a company for a long time, you have deep knowledge of that area where you have been working, and you can combine it in different things. So everyone has potential. But, creativity cannot be imposed to people, especially if they are, like, that's not my thing. Then you as a leader have to know those small things and try to get this out of them, or try to explain to them, and try to see that we all have creativity, and invite and work slowly with it, because nothing comes one day to another. What you can do on every day, like safety, is it allowed to experiment in your group? How do you experiment? Which experiments are allowed within your team? It doesn't have to be a big ones. It's just like Canva was launched. Do you allow your marketing team to just jump on it and test it? AI was launched. DeepSeek was launched. Do you allow you are using maybe ChatGPT, but do you allow also your employees, let's trust DeepSeek. Let's just check it. But be careful of some small things, like, the confidentiality, and that you have to be careful of. But do you jump on it, or do you say, no, that's Chinese, we don't do that? Why shouldn't you do that? It's not a big thing. And then also, like, some people don't like lots of changes. Some by the personality, some are more open, some are more closed. And you cannot press those that are a little bit by nature closed. You have to help them to open up and create safe environments. And as I talked with someone yesterday, you want to change, that more ideas are coming. You have to show people that you are actually listening. So you say, come up with ideas. Like, I'm always listening for ideas, but that means that third time they come up with ideas, you cannot dismiss it and say, oh no, whatever, we don't have time for this. You have to follow through as a leader. You have to stay on the course, even when it's difficult, even when they then respond. So I think this is And then, of course, as an employee, it cannot be everything leader has to do. We all have to help bottom up, because we all need at the end of the day the job and the salary.
I think that's the really important bit, is that if people feel like they are being asked to change for change's sake, or because it's coming top down, and it's being labeled as let's innovate, let's change, let's be creative, as opposed to some of the language there, which might be, we all want to make sure that this company is successful. The world is changing. We need to catch up with it. What are things we can do differently in your world of knowledge that you will know more than we do as leadership? What are things that we could be doing better? How could we be more efficient? How could we be more collaborative or whatever?
Yeah.
So that it doesn't feel like change for change's sake, but there is a reason and a value that I'm working towards.
Like just by asking, what's the one thing we can change today? What is the one thing we don't need to do anymore?
Yeah, I like that.
That's as simple as that. What is the one thing that is unnecessary?
I'm sure people would come up with very long lists in most jobs.
And then you choose one.
Great,
Let's start with one. And let's try that. Let's experiment for a week. If it doesn't work, let's try another one. And after a while, and then what you're learning here, first that they come up with ideas. You're also learning them experimenting. And those things are important. Speaking up and experimenting are important for innovation. So it doesn't have to be big things, but for me personally, those small things are the most important, because they're very unconscious and they actually show the true nature of something, not the big talks. Everyone can do that.
Yeah, agreed.
I think part of the challenge is we kind of live in different realities in our mind. So when I think of like what I want to do today, I actually have like a potential future state in mind that I'm trying to live toward, while simultaneously trying to remain me. So I want to occupy this world that is different from my current world, but I don't want to change. I want the world to change. And I think there's this kind of dichotomy or kind of conflict between wanting something new and not wanting to be new, because new is painful. New is trade-offs and loss. And we want to eat the cake. We don't want to, give up money to get the cake. It's like if that analogy works, I just pulled that out of my head. But there's this concept that it, like Newton's kind of law of thermodynamics, where it takes, something about it's not like destroyed, or, it needs to be, you need to give something to get something.
Yeah.
So with the leader and teams, I found this in my experience, where you start out and you are a company of one, and then you become a company of two, and then three. And the person you were to get to a company of two is typically not, you can't remain the same person in order to get to a company of 100 or 1,000. And so you almost have to become different, and or let go. And that can be like challenging for people, because then the company starts to look different than you. And there's this weird, like a child having their own thoughts. Like, how dare you? It's like, you're supposed to be a little parrot of me. You say my thoughts. You believe what I believe. More of me. And I realize that's maybe tongue in cheek, maybe not so tongue in cheek. But it sounds obvious from the outside, but when you're like living through it, it's like, it sounds crazy. It's like me, like, it's like, okay, you need to start walking on your hands. It's like, what? I was walking on my legs, like, to get here. Why are you telling me I have to be something different to get where I want to be? I don't know. I see this challenge with leaders implementing what you're describing. And from the outside, it seems very obvious. But what I've seen from the inside, it's deceptively challenging to adapt, to evolve, to be who you actually want to be, because it's scary to let go of what you know. And I'm curious, in your research and your own experience, what do you think are, I guess, on the one hand, why is that the case, that we should want something that we're not actually, how should I say this? It it doesn't really fit our current selves. And then how do we adapt to that? Is it through like counsel, advisory work, like peers, like peer groups, having a good kind of network? What are the steps that people can implement to capably navigate the growth of their own career or company?
Mm. Okay, I wrote some of the thoughts I wanted to to comment. I love the things that you mentioned that you don't want to change, but you expect others to change in the company, and that's such an important sentence to keep in mind, because it's very difficult to require others to change if we are not willing to change. And I know it's kind of counterintuitive, but as a leader, you have to embrace that you cannot expect others to change while you are resisting the change. Then you are not walking the talk. So first you have to also see what things are you doing maybe in the wrong direction. It doesn't have to be big things, and it can be small things like if you are a team leader, you are leading meetings every Monday. There is a team meeting. Are there any patterns that are repeating in the meetings? Can you influence to change them? And it can be simple as, do the same people speak all the time? How about we change this dynamic and give much more air to someone else, and kind of try to voice them a little bit down so that others can be heard as well? Or how do I approach these other people that are not voicing their thoughts on the meeting? Can I approach them outside the meetings? But because you need everyone's input. It's important for the company to get to get good inputs, to get different perspectives so you can have better outcomes. And about evolving, what you said, I'm also, I love your philosophy part, because I'm also always a universe and physics and evolution. And we all say that we don't like to change, but we do love the change. We do love it, because especially when it's fun, exciting, and possibly positive, right? When there is a need, because even it's a matter of survival. When Corona hit, we all went to the digital videos without any problems. Suddenly, it was the matter of survival. Columbus traveled to this other side of the planet into unknown. Nothing was chasing him. So some of the people are going for the excitement. Some of us are much more tolerable towards breaking the rules around us, or some limits that we like to chasing our limits and expanding them. And I believe people are doing that in different ways. Someone wants to be faster running, someone wants to be entrepreneur in other ways. So I think we all have something that we are always kind of testing, and we wouldn't be in this evolution stage if we haven't been. It's kind of natural to evolve, So I think that comes also natural, although sometimes we are afraid of the change, and we are both afraid and embracing the change, sometimes simultaneously, sometimes indifferent. And then you ask that, and then you have this growth from one person to the 100 persons. As I am also a lot in the entrepreneurial environment as well, and myself entrepreneur, you have to let it go at a certain point. You have an idea, you entrepreneur, that's your baby. But at a certain point, this baby is mature enough that doesn't need you so much. And sometimes it's good for the founders to move away, so that someone else who has experience of leading 100 people, who has different, maybe for this technology, this service, for this company, maybe you need a different set of skills. Maybe your skills were great at the beginning. And we also the projects, we don't have to talk about startups. Also, the projects are different in the beginning, different in the middle, and different at the end. And so is the company. So I don't think we should be afraid of this. And I don't look on my company one day that I always have to be there. I want to also move out and let someone else lead. I did my dream. My dream is up to here, and now someone else can take. So sticking too much to something, maybe it's not the best solution for the long run. Did I answer that?
Oh, you answered it beautifully. I'm impressed that I could throw all that at you and get quality answers back. So thank you.
Thank you.
It makes me think as well, Barbara, about what you were saying, how we all say we don't like change, but we all want it, right?
You change the job, right?
Yeah, winning the lottery is a change that I'm sure everybody would want to have.
Yeah.
And I think part of it as well is the change happening to me, or am I choosing the change? Which
that's
changes the way that we see it. If I choose to change my job versus I'm fired, it feels different. The reality is the same. I stop doing job one, I go and do job two, but it feels different if I'm in the driving seat.
That's
And perhaps
beautiful said.
part of that is to encourage people to deliberately choose. Change is going to happen anyway. So you might as well be in the driving seat of it. You might as well choose it for yourself.
That's beautiful example, Becky. I really like. It's the same thing, but from different perspectives, and from someone who really loves the freedom of choice. I know how much it means for me to be able to choose my own next step. Yes. So yeah, it's the matter of perspective, of course. As well, yeah.
When you try to control outcomes, the world is smaller. And you mentioned kind of early adopters versus late adopters with like technology or something. You see like the adoption curve, like there's people are using BlackBerry phones and all of a sudden there's this iPhone without a stylus. And some people are really excited and some people are like, whoa, that's radical technology. I'm going to wait until it's proven to be useful. And I think that trying to think how to frame this succinctly. I think there's value in each. I think there's this kind of almost like team sportsmanship. Like you should think my way, your way of thinking is wrong. I'm risk on early adopter, and it's sometimes frustrating to have the naysayers be like, ask the questions like, if this is valuable, why doesn't it exist yet? It's like, well, we wouldn't be anywhere if like the wheel was too radical to adopt, or fire or something. That's my thinking. I mean, obviously it's one half of the equation. I recognize you need people checking things and validating things. But I think of culture and I think of necessity and I think of what you mentioned about Norway, safety, security, and these things that we strive toward, sometimes perhaps heavy-handedly, but I think that there's choices between controlling outcomes and the scarcity mindset and letting go of outcomes and a growth mindset or a rising tide lifting all boats. And when I look at large projects like space stations or skyscrapers, typically you need high trust. I need to trust you without looking over your shoulder in order to accomplish projects like that. But if I want to control outcomes, maybe I go for information asymmetry too much. And I try to cheat you too much. And I try to extract your resources, pickpockets or things like that, low trust environments. And I think that's in each of us, the capacity for each of these choices. And it's just a matter of kind of recognizing the game that we want to play and recognizing the potential rewards. And I think it's beautiful that there are places like Norway, I haven't lived there, I've only visited, but where you have found this ability to provide value to the world from your own journey, through your books, through your education. And I'm curious, what are your thoughts with, like, what would you like to see from entrepreneurs and from businesses navigating these, from everyone I talk to, uncertain times?
What would I like to see? Oh, that's very, very big question.
You can make it
in
small.
general, what I would like to see, maybe the US listeners would not like this, but I would like that we have a little more tech giants here in Europe. That I would like to see. So we are a little bit less, so there are a little bit less dependency of certain actors. That I would like to see that. And I love that you mentioned high trust and low environment trust, because Norway is a high trust environment and Croatia is on the opposite end. And COVID was a perfect example of that, because here in Norway, everyone was following the rules and they were respecting them really beautifully. And there was not lots of debate. People were disciplined. They trusted their recommendations. While in Croatia, it was a completely different story. And I love one example from Croatia, when Europe started to forbid smoking in public places. This also happened in Croatia, but the law was killed after a couple of months only, because no one like that. And then it took some years and they imposed it again, but it's again not the same solution as they have in Norway. So, and the trust, or having the ability to see the benefit of something in the long run, I think that's the virtue of a good leader, or the good person, or the good anyone. Being able to understand that this is for the future, good what I'm doing. And especially if we are looking today in the climate change and everything that is happening, now it's even more crucial to be aware the long-term effect we are all creating. And of course, businesses, and when we talk about IE, they also have a climate impact. So I love IE and I love all this, but we should not forget the other things that are happening and try to solve this side of the equation as well simultaneously.
And that comes back to what you said right at the start, Barbara, when David asked you about the suffering or adversity that we go through, and you said it's about the longer term. It's about doing what you need to do now to get what you want or need in the future. It's full circle.
Well, yeah, thank you, Barbara, for sharing your inspiring journey with us and your insights into innovation. Where can people get in touch with you, follow your work, buy your book? Where would you like to direct people?
Thank you. Before maybe we close, I really want to thank Becky and you, David, for inviting me. And it was very wonderful conversation. And I really enjoyed your wonderful, very thoughtful philosophical questions. But people, yes, they can find me on LinkedIn or my webpage, barbarasalopek.com. The book is available on Amazon all around the world, and at the main retailers all around the world as well. So, and it had got 8 out of 10 on Get Abstract editors grade. So that's
Congratulations.
Nice well. And it was a bestseller on Amazon as well.
Excellent. We'll put it up in the show notes. Well, thank you once again for chatting with us. Really interesting conversation.
Thank you, you too.